So how long did anti-nuclear campaigners protest at Greenham Common? The answer is 19 years.
Incredible, isn't it? 19 years, that women's peace camp at RAF Greenham Common. It ran from 1981, September 1981 to September 2000. Hundreds of women, mainly women, there were other people there as well, gathered to oppose the storing of cruise missiles. And the great irony is the cruise missiles were removed 9 years before they left, which I find bizarre. Anyway, you're watching The Right Stuff live on 5 with Carol Malone, Mark Little and our special guest, Dean Andrews. Still to come this morning, do troubled lovers Jordan and Peter Andre have any right to privacy as their marriage hits the rocks, or have they forgone that right after selling up every other aspect of their lives to glossy magazines and whatnot? 0207 173 5555 is the number. First, though, should there be a time limit on protests? The only place there is a limit, ironically, is on Parliament Square, which has been besieged by up to 500 demonstrators for the past 5 weeks. Members of the Tamil community want the British government to intervene in Sri Lanka, where some 250,000 civilians are trapped in a so-called UN safe zone, which is regularly bombed. The Sri Lankan government blames the Tamil Tigers for the attacks, and the Tigers blame the government. As for the demo, well, permission was originally granted for 50 people to gather for up to a month. So the protest is way, way outside its remit, which begs the question, why aren't the police moving them on? Demonstrators have been blocking roads, jumping in the Thames, climbing Westminster Abbey, not to mention threatening a half-Tamil friend of mine whom they accused of being a spy. And he isn't, as far as I know. The police are negotiating with the demonstrators, apparently, but clearly not in the same way they negotiated with Ian Tomlinson and others at the recent G20 protests. Foul-tempered politician Michael Martin reckons the Tamils have hijacked Parliament Square and are stopping others from holding their demos for equally worthy causes, which I have to say I found an interesting point. Don't know what you have to say about that. And what about peace campaigner Brian Hoy? I mean, he's been camped outside Parliament for 8 years. It's his presence is believed to be the thing that prompted MPs to impose a time limit on other demos in the area, but not elsewhere. Should that change, Carol?
You know, this is very hard because I think everyone has a right to protest in this country, and I have huge sympathy with the plight of the Tamils. You know, there's a genocide going on there at the moment. You know, and I think this country is very good in allowing people to protest, and their right to protest has been honoured without question. But I don't know what we can do. I don't know how we can change anything and how their demos are going to change anything. And what I know is that the centre of London now is getting... It's a mess, you know. People can't travel around the city anymore because the protest is now spilling onto the road.
Day before yesterday, we had motorcycles rightfully protesting against Westminster Council's stupid plan to charge them for parking. They should be encouraging motorcycles. We had that going on in Trafalgar Square, and the town was in Parliament Square.
And so traffic and everyone getting to and from their jobs and everything, and it's now costing lots of money. We have loads of police, you know, on that demo when they should be doing other things. But, you know, I have huge sympathy with them, and my God, you know, thank God there are still people willing to protest and give their time to do that. However, it's now starting to affect the way London is run. And I think maybe, if something useful was going to come out of it, maybe, but you know, it's interesting, the news stations, apart from now, haven't been covering it. It's the BBC up until
Well, there's a problem
if
you allow things to run on and on and on.
People
that
just
it becomes
get bored.
boring.
You know, you drive past now and it's like, oh, you know, it's the Tamil protesters. You don't think about why they're there anymore. They're almost, you know, the whole point of what they're doing has been lost, because we just know that it's a raggedy group in tents and stuff, and that they're eating on the roadside, and we're almost forgetting why they're there, and so it defeats the whole object. I think
once they become an irritant to society, if you like, then they start to lose the strength of their cause. Yeah. You know, if they come and make a good protest and they put a good point forward, all of a sudden, if they're stopping people getting to work and they're swooning all over the roads and all over wherever, people start to go against them slightly rather than with them. So maybe it's time for them to move on.
One of the things that I've sort of learnt since doing this show is, you know, start saying, oh, you know, we want to live in a free country. It means we should be free to do everything, even vote BNP, although I wouldn't recommend it. And then the Danish cartoons, which I still feel kind of annoyed that we haven't been able to show and discuss on the programme, because I think adults can have discussions. But it did make me realise that freedom is a kind of two-way street. You can't just have absolute freedom. And so I think, you know, everyone has the right to protest, and we have a great record for protesting in this country, but it does... 5 weeks.
And Dean's right, we're losing sympathy. We're getting cross with them now. You know,
that's unfortunate. And protest it's empowering. And I'm sure it's empowering a whole younger generation of young people, Sri Lankans, that are going along and feeling good that they live in a country where they can actually say what they want, and that is good. But I think it's time for the protest group to actually form a delegation, go to the police, sort it out, and get their numbers down, keep the protest going, but just sort of suss it out.
But then what about Michael Martin's point that, you know, Parliament Square, which is the one place where there is a time limit, but it's not being enforced. I mean, lots of people have causes.
Yes.
Their right to protest is kind of being infringed by the Tamils staying there.
That's because it's the size of half a football pitch.
Yeah.
They need to make the protest area a little bit bigger.
Or enforce the time limit. I mean, I think 4 weeks is long enough to make a point, isn't it?
So you enforce the time limit, and then you've got protesters protesting against the time limit.
Yeah, but the cops are in a very difficult position now, especially after, you know, the demos in London. You know, they've got to be very careful what they do now and how they handle people. And the Tamil protesters are very peaceful people. You don't want the sight of cops manhandling those people out of the area. It's not going to look good for anyone. So they're in a very difficult position, I think.
But if there's a law to be upheld,
you're right.
Then they have to uphold the law.
Yeah.
You know, if they've got 4 weeks to protest and 4 weeks is finished, they've got to move on.
Yeah.
You know, and the police have a duty to move them on. And
even if it would mean ugly images.
Well, you know, maybe they went a little.
You can
further
see why
than
they're you can see why they're being hesitant, can't
Absolutely,
you? Yeah.
but there must be a way. You know, if the Tamils are peaceful protesters, they should peacefully move on.
Okay. What does our audience think about this, Aaron?
Okay, well, next to me is Angela. So, should there be a time limit on protests?
Not in principle, no, I don't think so.
I mean, do you? I mean, Michael Martin. I hadn't thought about it before. He's saying that, you know, by allowing this demonstration to go on in Parliament Square, which is very small, as Mark points out, other people and their protests, they can't get there. They can't be heard. And so there is a question of balance here, isn't there?
Yes, I do understand that, but I think in principle they should be allowed to protest as long as they want, if it's a valid cause, which personally I think the Tamil is.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's disturbing everybody, they can't get through London and everything, reminds us that we have a democratic country and these people don't. And I think they should make arrangements that they don't disturb the roads too much, perhaps, but they should be allowed to go on as long as they want.
And if that means that other people can't protest, that's okay?
Oh, well, then they should perhaps make space for everybody. I don't know how, as he was saying.
Yes.
Mark, you could get a delegation.
Get a bigger space.
But I do believe in this freedom of people to protest when it's really valid.
Okay.
And that's how I feel.
Kirsty on the phones?
Yes, we have Gary in Glasgow on line 1.
OK, Gary, good morning.
Hi, good morning to you, Japan.
What do you think of this, then?
My point is that I feel that in this country especially, everybody has a right to protest, as we've said, but I feel that there's a big element within Britain that just hijacks protests and tag along for the sake of protest, basically.
Right. If someone wants something, I'm trying to think. There's one, wasn't there, in the Peak District recently? Was it Stanton? Was it where they were out 9 years protesting against a quarry, and they won, and that just by hanging out there for 9 years. I mean, London Parliament Square, there is a time restriction. Elsewhere, there isn't. Do you think that demonstrations should be restricted to 1 day, Gary? Something perhaps?
I'm not saying that for a minute. As I said. I've no doubt there's a lot of genuine people protesting in Parliament Square, just like there's a lot of genuine people spent 19 years, was it, at Common?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of them tagged along just for the right.
I'm not sure. I don't know how many people would just genuinely want to just camp in Parliament Square for the fun of it, Gary. Thank you for the call. Let's have another, Kirsty.
David's on line 2.
OK, David, good morning. Do we need a time limit on demonstrations?
Oh, hello.
Hi there.
I don't think we do, no. I mean, already civil liberties in this country are being eroded enough when it comes to protest. I've worked in Parliament for 7 months, and every morning I'd walk past Brian Hall's demonstration. Yeah. And I've seen people being hassled by the police, almost being arrested for taking photos of it under the anti-terrorism law. So I think that the way things are going now, there should be no time limit whatsoever on protest, because I think it's getting more and more pertinent as time goes by.
No, it's a fair point, I guess, David. Thank you. Thank you for the call. After the ads, we're going to move on to from democratic right to protest to Jordan and Peter Andre, and asking if they deserve privacy. It is a very interesting point, because a lot of people will say they've forgone the right to privacy after flogging their wedding and everything else to magazines and TV channels. Asking the press to leave them alone just as their marriage hits the rocks might sound a bit rich, but doesn't everyone, even those two, still have the right to a private life? 0207 173 5555 is the number for your thoughts. Do Jordan and Peter deserve privacy? I wish we had a bit more from them personally. We'll find out after the ads.
How much did OK Magazine pay for Jordan and Peter's wedding photos? 750,000, 1 million or 1.75 million? Find out after the break.